Hey everybody, it's Denise, and just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on. I'm going to probably do some um, another thing about the economy coming up here on the next live thing here, the next video that I make, which will be showing you guys some of the aspects that are problematic that are happening currently. I've been working on a piece for Substack, and I'm thinking that it might be the easiest thing to just kind of show it and also maybe have a companion piece that is written. So I want to talk a little bit about something that's been on my mind lately because I've been listening to a lot of stories of people who have out of body experiences, but rather have near death experiences, NDEs. Um, and from the plethora of different things I've heard different people talking about, and I've heard many stories over the years, but also listening to the stories that are on YouTube and, um, you know, it's in the zeitgeist. I've heard other stories besides that. And also, like I said, personally, I've heard people tell me their stories. The thing that really sticks out about all of them is that they're very individual. And we've been led to believe, probably as these stories were emerging in the 90s and the early 2000s, that there was a sort of set of things that happened to people over and over again, like you see the light and you go into the tunnel and you go to the other side and all of these things, which there are people who've had those experiences. There's also stories of people who go to hell. I actually had a friend of mine who was an old occultist who I was really good friends with for many, many years. He passed away a long time ago now, but he was about 50 years older than me. And he had had an experience where he was taken to hell. He was taken across the universe and brought to this fiery place where he said that, he was brought, he had all of his negative energy burnt off of him, and then he was taken to meet um, the master, he called it, because he was, well, kind of comes from a religious background. And he said that basically, upon meeting the master, he saw his life and all those things. And he had a very unique experience. He was dead for over 20 minutes and came back and changed his life. It was a very big experience. He ended up also working for Peter Herkos, who's a psychic, and he's the guy who told me about some of the things I've talked about here over the years. But his experience was interesting because, you know, from his perspective, the hell landscape, which in actually Nordic mythology, where hell comes from, actually, hell is the oven fires, and it's related to the goddess, and it is more like what he experienced, which is this place where it sort of are purified and not necessarily a place of torture. And that was his experience. Now, one of the things I've noticed about a lot of these stories is that depending on people's experience, who they are, what they're doing in life, and how they live their life, and what their belief systems are, their transition is very much in keeping with that. There's a story about a um, doctor who's a neurologist, neuroscientist, and he had this experience of kind of going down to the cell structure and then going up and back and forth and stuff with these different levels of consciousness. And we know from the stories that are in Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism, that there are different layers or levels of the astral plane. And I was listening to a story today where the woman grew up Catholic and she had this period where she was in a coma. And she's not I also knew someone back when I was working as a psychic who had that experience of being in a coma and having this very kind of horrible experience where she claimed to go to hell and she had all these horrible experiences. I also, when I was 17, was put in a drug induced coma because I had had surgery right here. I had a tumor that turned out to be life-threatening. It's a week away from killing me, and it was a very extensive surgery. It lasted like 18 hours, um, and basically, I was released within a week, and the medicine wasn't strong enough, and it was extraordinarily painful. And I started having a seizure, and I had to be rushed back to the hospital and put in a drug-induced coma to settle my system down. And it was weird because I had had dreams starting from the age of about 8 or 9 that I was in this state where I couldn't open my eyes. I was in this dark place and people were talking around me and I couldn't move and I couldn't respond. And um I had that experience when when I was put in the drug induced coma. I was aware of my surroundings. I was sort of kind of halfway in and out of my body, and I could hear people talking, and I could see things like beings in the room. They were not pleasant. And I think the reason they weren't pleasant was because I was in pain and it was scary and I couldn't move and I was freaked out. And this is why I had that experience. The other thing that was interesting was those same beings, very similar, these like hooded dark figures I had seen earlier. And I had a very weird and difficult childhood, which these things sort of appeared during a period of like extreme psychic stuff that was happening to me around 12, 13 years old. So then later, I had a near death experience when I was um, in my 20s. I think I was probably 26, 27, something like that. And I had had this reoccurring nightmare that I was sitting on, like in Venice Beach on a hill, and I was looking at the Pacific Ocean when I moved to California. And it was like the whole thing was tipping out on top of me, like a tsunami type of thing. And I had had this really intense fear of going into that water, into the Pacific. And I told my husband about it and was really didn't ever want to go in the water because I felt like I would drown. And he kept trying to get me to do it. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then one day, a friend of mine wanted me to give them a reading. And so we went to the beach with them. And I said, well, if you just let me do this and kind of spend some time with her, giving her the reading, I'll go in and try. And he's like, well, we won't go swimming. You just stand there and sort of splash around. And so we did that. And as we were splashing around, I started getting fatigued and the waves started getting more and more intense and the undertow got more intense. And I turned around and I was hit by a wave and I was pulled under and I was going under into deep into the ocean and I started to drown. And I'm not someone who has a really strong survival instinct. So I was like, okay, fine, that's cool, whatever. And so I saw this light coming to at the top of the water, and it was this bright, kind of pinkish light, I guess you could. It really seemed like it was kind of a pink color, or it had that energy of pink, if that makes sense. I don't know if it was literally pink, but it felt like this intense love and light and all this beautiful feminine goddess kind of energy coming for me. And I came out of my body. And then all of it, and I was about ready to transition. I mean, I was like right there coming out of my body, about to like leave. And uh and I remember like some of the things I was thinking about as I was drowning. It was totally peaceful. I was fine. And then all of a sudden I felt this hand pull me, and my body, which was separated from my consciousness, ran without me being in it, and came to the shore. And I guess I had like sand all over the place. I had sand all impacted on my sinuses and my ears, but I followed my body, so I was above it, and I could hear and see in 360 degrees. And I can't even explain it. It was so extreme and vivid and very weird because it was like I had eyes all around me. I could see everything. And um I continued to stay out of my body for the whole time we were staying there. And my friends, I had two friends and my husband were all at the beach. And I was talking to them and I was interacting with them, um and everything seemed fine. People ran down the beach because they saw that I was drowning, and trying to help. And I was kind of more embarrassed by the whole thing than anything. And so I was like, I'm fine. And I called up, everything kind of sorted out, went to the bathroom and then as we were kind of about 15 or 20 minutes later, we were getting ready to leave. We got into the car, and all of a sudden, I went back into my body and I realized I couldn't hear a thing. They were talking to me. I couldn't make out anything they were saying. And my eyes hurt. My ears were completely impacted with sand. And it took literally months before all the sand came out of my ears and out of my nose. And it was just insane. And I couldn't make heads or tails of how I could hear them other than I wasn't in my body, because I literally couldn't hear a thing. I mean, it was like completely, I could, they were talking and I just saw their mouths moving and I could not hear them. So that was kind of, you know, that was a near death experience that came out of my body because I was dying and I lived through it, but I didn't go all the way out and it wasn't that traumatic. It was just the start of a near death experience. Um, but some of the things that I have noticed about other people's near death experiences is that for me, some of them were interesting in that a lot of the people seem to have, some of the women had feminine goddess type transcendent experiences, and that a lot of them had these sort of difficult transitions in terms of the first place they went to was scary and problematic, or they weren't sure where they were confused. And there's many variations of this. As many types of people as there are variations of this. One guy talked about, he was a filmmaker and everything looked like a movie to him. So depending on whatever you were used to in life, spirit talks to you through that. And whatever your belief system is, spirit uses that to communicate with you. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is something really important, I think, to think about. It seems like people that have very extreme black and white religious views have much more problematic and scary transition points. The people that seem to do the best and who had the most positive and easy transitions were people that did not have real extreme, were really not religious. They may have abandoned their religious tradition or whatever, but they had a transition that was much more natural and something that was much more positive. So, something to think about is building your own connection to spirit. And one of the things that you find across the board is that usually people climb out of the sort of bardo place, which is kind of scary or problematic, or depending on whatever their fear is. One woman who's Catholic saw demons, and she was in a coma, and she was in hell. She thought, which it was very much kind of like the good place version of hell. It was kind of a little bit. It was a sort of interesting. That basically, the way I can understand this and kind of try to explain it is that our belief systems and our who we are, we're each different, like snowflakes coming out of the snowstorm. The snowstorm is the creator. All things are part of are all one. And we are each little individuated variations of spirit. We each have our own unique perspective. And that's the point of living and sort of learning and individuating, and also kind of gathering data and gathering like probes, more and more understanding of itself, the creator. The creator itself is just pure love, and it's not male or female, but probably has more in common with what we think of as feminine qualities of unconditional love, um, the feeling of oneness, the way you are connected to your mother, than it does really with the role of father in our culture. Not to say that it is female, because it isn't, doesn't have a gender. And actually, if you look behind me at this weird version of, and I have a better version somewhere, but um, of uh, of the Kabbalah, this area right here is the right past here, where you see this guy, that's Kether. That is the unknowable. That is the place where that is the source of all. And this is, it goes down the tree like that. This is the hidden one. But anyway, and all the way down here is where we're at. So if you can see, there's all these levels. This is the feminine side, and that's the masculine side. And this is where they meet the neutral side in the middle. So the energy of creation goes through this process. And there are multiple layers of, people say, oh, there's all these dimensions. Well, it's more than dimensions. There's all of these planes of existence, and there's multiple universes. This is an infinite, expanding, constantly evolving creative process that we're part of. And so each of us has our own assignment to basically, we all have strengths and weaknesses. We pick things as we come. And sometimes I think there are things that we take on that maybe we can't handle. And sometimes things that were left undone from other lifetimes that have to be done. There's a whole range of possibilities, and I don't pretend to know, and nobody does, exactly how it works, because it is very complex and infinite. But I do know that our beliefs shape our experience as we transition. And our connection to source also helps a lot. The more you are in touch with praying, meditating, talking to this higher power, however you want to conceive of it, it doesn't really matter how you conceive of it. Um, some people's stories sounded like they met their higher self. One person in particular talked about it as their original copy, and that is what the higher self is. The higher self is you, the perfected version that is cast out from creation, and that is always with you in every lifetime. It's sort of your soul, but it's beyond that. It's one of the consciousnesses that you possess in every lifetime, and it sort of protects you and guides you as so many other of your lifetimes, um, which also continue to be there with you as you move through and your consciousness evolves into different identities. So what I'm saying is, the clearer you get and the less um, judgment you put around yourself and others, and the more you accept yourself and all that is, and the more you come from a place of love and compassion, and the more you work towards that connection to your source, to higher self, to the divine field, whatever you want to call it, God, it doesn't, goddess, whatever, um, the easier your transition is, and the more positive and connected you are immediately without having to go through the kind of weird and negative experiences that some people get stuck in, because they can't get past that. So it's important to do your spiritual work, especially in this period of time where we're in a very dark period that is going to probably get more tumultuous and problematic. And really, the whole purpose of being here is to learn, to grow, to love, and to be better people, and to perfect ourselves, and to learn as much as we possibly can. And I don't mean perfect in terms of perfectionism, being a perfect version. I mean self acceptance of what our gifts are. And every single human being, and every single being, it doesn't matter what being they are, has special attributes and abilities and talents, and every single piece of creation is part of the tapestry of the Godhead, or the creator, the universe. And every single piece of the Godhead is important. Every single piece of the divine is just as important as the other. And it's all one thing, but it's separated for our ability to learn and grow. And sometimes I think my theory is that the divine field created all of this so it could experience itself. And so each one of us, each thing that exists in creation is some variation of creator that is trying to experience itself through that thing. And once it transitions to the other side, it brings that knowledge back to it. And I think that's a very oversimplification of it, but that's, I think, what is happening on some very fundamental level. So I want to push you towards doing that and try to encourage you to whatever practice you can think of, whether it's doing yoga and meditation or meditating or praying or just sitting with yourself, meditating, making a painting, knitting, drawing, playing music, anything that connects you to your soul. This is the time to be doing that work and to really keep doing that work. And I think on the 15th, when that day, that special day that Baba Vanga brought up, I think we're going to do some kind of online meditation. I'm going to try to do that, and I have some tools to bring to the table, and so join me on that day. I'll probably do a live stream on both platforms, and or maybe I'll do it and just put it out on both platforms of Substack and here and on YouTube. All right, blessings to all of you. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you later. Oh, and if you want to book a reading, you can Google me, Denise Siegel Booking, or you can go to the More button, or if you're a Substack member, I have a Book Now button that you can find on almost all my pages. All right, blessings.